Hello again. What could possibly push a mother to murder not one, but 4 of her offsprings? Earlier this week, we heard of 32-year-old Nombolego Simaile from Engcobo in the Eastern Cape killed her children. What could possibly drive any mother to such a point? Are there underlying or contributing factors that may have led to this gruesome incident? Well, today I'm joined by clinical psychologist Dr. Cathy Angus, Professor Kebogile Mokwena from the Sefako Makato Health Science University, and criminologist Professor Kholofela Rakubu to discuss this and looking at possibly what could trigger such behavior. Ladies, welcome. Thank you very much for your time here on today. Let me begin with you, Professor Mokwena, because recently I understand you did some research work in one rural part of South Africa, Nkangala district in Mpumalanga, around this issue of what is known as the postpartum depression and related mental health issues. Just share with us, what did you find? What did you observe?
Well, my research covers a number of provinces, both rural and urban areas. But I want to focus on the rural areas, as you have said. You see, the issue of postnatal depression or postpartum depression is complex. And the contributory factors are also very complex. They are influenced by the social environment. So in some rural areas, you find higher rates of postpartum depression, whereas in some areas you find lower rates. So it's not a uniform pattern that rural areas will have either high or low. In this particular case in Nkangala, which is a rural area, we found lower rates compared to urban centers.
Okay, so the environment comes into play here?
The environment definitely comes into play. The expectation from the woman comes into play. The help-seeking behavior comes into play. As an example, if you have postnatal depression, you feel sad, you feel not energized. And when a baby is born, we automatically think that it's a joyful experience. You are expected to be happy and energized. And when women feel down and they don't meet the expectations of society, they don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, because this is supposed to bring, the child is supposed to bring joy into the home. And that old expression of a bundle of joy.
Yeah.
But
and the experience may not be that. You are expected to feel joyful, but you are not because of something else.
Okay, I want to bring in you, Dr. Angus, as a clinical psychologist. I mean, one of the factors we are hearing from Professor Mokwena here is about the environment, the social environment. What other factors can contribute to such a state of mental health for a mother after giving birth?
I think there are a lot of social factors that also play a role. And I think it's important not to put people in an isolated spot of this is happening, therefore. Yes, postpartum blues, what Professor says is correct. So the past will play into the thing a lot. However, people are not coping anyway. There are so many things going on in the country. There's so much shortage of money. There's so many factors that will be adding exceptionally stressful factors to the mother and how she can deal with her children. And it also depends on what support she is getting.
Yeah, support is important and social factors are important. Professor Rakubu, let me bring you in there. So it's important then to make sure that there's some level of structure or organizational in terms of supporting mothers.
Thank you, Danny. True, communities should come into play in this area. I agree with the researchers when they identified sociological factors or community issues, because in this case, we have to tap into attitude towards depression and vulnerability of community members when it comes to neglected mental illness or mental issues, our attitude and social disorganization, because I think we live in communities that are not accommodating or that are not ready to tap into issues of mental illness. Hence, one become frustrated. Hence, we're dealing with aggression and frustration. And for a mother to take this kind of decision, it also depends on how socially disorganized the community is, how open, what are community structures in place. Because if there are community structures, health worker could have identified her vulnerability or possibility, or how vulnerable her family or community is because of her mental state.
Yeah, I would assume that, Professor Mokwena, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that from your research in rural South Africa around this matter, poverty will worsen the vicious cycle.
Definitely. You know, there are various factors that are associated with postnatal depression. Poverty is one of those, but also lack of support from specifically the baby's father and other things. And so if it's...
And also, if therefore, when you said that, I'm thinking if the mother cannot earn income, it will even be worse.
Yes, it will actually be worse. So if the father is not in the life of the baby and the mother is not, so it's just additional factors that elevate the levels of postnatal depression.
Yeah. The mental health, Dr. Angus, it's got a stigma to it. Still in South Africa, every time we speak about mental health awareness, I mean, October was Mental Health Awareness Month in South Africa, we still find that there's a lot of stigma. And in this particular case of the mother of Engcobo, when her mother was asked, the grandmother of the children, she said she seemed to be okay. So the stigma can play a role in disadvantaging people from coming out and say, hey, I need help.
I think you're completely correct. And the stress is very much on the mother. She's got too much to do. It's all, if the father's not there, as so often happens in the South African situation, the father is not around to help because he's trying to earn money. So the wife is at home raising these children. But this can't be a simple matter of postpartum blues, because the youngest child was 2 and the oldest child was 11, and she killed all 4 of those children. So I think there was more in the mix than we realize.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and find out in court. The case resumes on Monday, but just wanting to focus on this issue because it looks like it's more prevalent than we think in South Africa. What have you found? I mean, are more women, especially in poor communities, Professor Mokwena, suffering from this kind of depression?
Yes. You know, what is said is that in South Africa, we don't routinely screen for postnatal depression for mothers who have given birth. In other countries, it's part of the healthcare package.
Why don't we screen for it in this country?
I don't know, but we just don't screen. Actually, part of my research, I'm building a case
for
policy change, for policy change, so that screening for postnatal depression should be part of the package for all women who go to clinics after giving birth. Actually, in other countries, they screen antenatal before the women give birth, that is when they're pregnant, and then after they give birth, because research is coming out actually to say those women that we pick up at the postnatal period, they've actually been, some of them, they've actually been depressed even before giving birth. So we really need a policy change in the care of mothers and children, because postnatal depression doesn't only affect the mother, it also affects the child. Well, and there are definitely long-term impacts on the child.
Yeah.
this child is raised by a mother.
And I think we need to point out
depressed.
that postnatal depression might lead, to suicide, for example.
Of course, of course.
For a mother
yes.
killing herself. Now, Professor Rakubu, the importance of policy, whether it's policy that supports the social structures or it's policy that supports the health of the mother, is very important. What are your thoughts, Professor Rakubu?
Highly important, because a women's violent act need to be understood within the holistic context of her life. So now, if we don't have policies in place that mandate supports to avoid acts of this nature, we are in for a big challenge. And remember, as a country, we're dealing with GBV on top of depression. So where are we heading to? Remember, we are even struggling with policies that thoroughly address issues of GBV. Now, research needs to highlight the magnitude of a depressed mother that is also experiencing gender-based violence crimes. So a lot needs to be done, and with the research that the professor is doing will all inform policy change. And now with this maternal filicide, more research also needs to be done, because we also need to understand problem of female aggression is located within interpersonal and institutionalized patterns of patriarchal society, as opposed to purely interpersonal attributes. So a lot has to be identified, because now, as the professor mentioned, when women fail to live up to idealized expectations, especially those of motherhood and stereotypical femininity, they are denigrated as either mad or bad. Now, violent women are constructed within a particular discourse of domesticity, sexuality, pathology. Now, these cultural stereotypes about women violence have serious implications regarding their treatment in the criminal justice system, and again, with regard to social policy. They don't have anywhere to go. There are no social policy that tap into women's need, hence this kind of killings.
Yeah, I will talk to you later about the importance of a case like this one, of this 32-year-old mother in Ngobo, to undergo psychiatric evaluation. We don't want to focus on the merits or the demerits of the case. We're not discussing a legal thing, but just your thoughts, Professor Rakubu. But let me come to you, Dr. Angus. The stats I saw the other day, which also led us to say, let's have this discussion here on eNCA, was quite horrible. That the prevalence of depression in South Africa and anxiety during pregnancy and in the year after birth ranges from 16% to 47%. So nearly half of women who give birth in the country in any given period, nearly half they are found to be anxious or suffering from depression. I mean, are you seeing evidence of this in your work as a clinical psychologist?
Yes, I think that's really true. And I think, what the professor was saying earlier definitely plays into this. Because the reality of the situation is that these women who are having babies and are not given enough support are people who have to cope with all kinds of things on the financial side, on...
Oh, we just lost that connection with Dr. Angus. Are you back, Dr. Angus?
There. And I think that is not very helpful. And I think that puts a lot more...
Okay, sorry, we just lost you there for a while.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Now you're back with us. Please carry on.
Okay, I don't know where you lost me, though. So,
yeah, you could start from...
What did I say last?
I lost that. You could start from the top. You could start just to remind us, what are you seeing in terms of... You said it is true that the prevalence is very high.
Right. I think that women, unfortunately, have to carry the bulk of the load of raising children and making sure that they turn out to be citizens that we are proud of and who can cope in that outside world. The men are out there working and the women are in a situation where there's perhaps poverty, where there's some isolation from important things, even though there are other people around. And they are now trying to cope with every single thing by themselves. Now, what drove this woman to be in a state where she couldn't cope with her 4 children that she has given birth to is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And I think that it is terribly important, because I think it stresses how much support we need to be giving people.
Yeah. Professor Rakubu, how important would it be in this case, just very briefly, for her to undergo proper psychiatric evaluation to really establish what was going on? Because just speaking for myself, and I have no idea what could have happened. I mean, I just can't imagine a mother waking up in the middle of the night and killing her 4 children just like that.
Danny, it is very, very critical that she undergoes psychiatric evaluation, because psychiatric evaluation, psychological evaluation, and also the sociological perspective comes into play. And mothers are more likely to kill their such as abandonment, unlike fathers or stepfathers who will be more violent when now committing an act. So obviously there are more psychiatric and psychological, and there's possibility of neglected mental illness here as well, or depression. So because this is unlikely, this is emotionally evocative, a provocative crime or evocative crime, one needs to be assessed thoroughly to check what was going on in the mind, what pushed her to that extent to commit such crime. So maternal femicide, filicide, it always requires psychiatric, psychological, and sociological evaluation.
Okay, just back now to, thanks for that, Professor Rakubu. Maternal and child health services, Professor Mokwena. In your research, how are we doing okay as a country?
Not at all. We are not doing okay, not at all. The fact that we don't screen for, and by the way, there are easy to use tools that can be used to screen women. So we are not doing well. And by not doing so, we are missing many women who are postnatally depressed. They are not diagnosed because we are not screening them. They are not getting the help that they need. And by the way, a mother who is postnatally depressed is not able to take care of her baby. So those babies have frequent visits to the doctor, high rates of diarrhea, malnutrition, and they even have higher rates of hospitalization because of the depressive state of the mother. So disregarding this is actually a violation of the mother and her children. We are not doing well, not at all.
And what about staff capacity?
Yes.
In terms of skills base as well.
You know, in my research, I use research assistants. The tool is standardized, it's validated, so you teach people. It doesn't have to be done by nurses or doctors. You teach people to use the tool, and then they pick up those women that need referral. That's the best way that we can address this issue.
Are you noticing any progress, Dr. Angus, in how we as a country are dealing with this? I mean, understanding and hearing you all well, there are so many factors, social factors, there's environmental factors, there's economic factors, there's patriarchal factors, cultural factors. But, I mean, are you seeing some attempt at least to make progress in this, in your field as a psychologist, to assist women?
I think that we probably are not coping.
Dr. Angus, we just lost you there again.
Systems.
The connection, you can start again. Dr. Angus, sorry, please start again. We lost you as you began answering again. Just start again.
Okay. I think that it's very important what the professor said, in that we are not, I don't think, giving enough comfort and feedback and support to these women who are out there on their own. And I think that's the state that the world is in at the moment, where people are not getting what they really need. And the women in this country who are having children and are alone trying to raise them, yes, there are other women around, thank heavens, but mostly they're on their own to diagnose what the problems were. I don't know what the circumstances of this particular case were, but it's very unusual to kill 4 of your children.
Okay, we are about to conclude, and I just want to give you just a thought I had now, a quick final remark. Is there something that's critical that we haven't discussed in regarding to this postpartum depression that mothers are facing in our country? As a parting comment, Professor Rakubu, let me start with you. Okay, she's not hearing me now. Professor Mokwena?
Yes, you know, one of the contributory factors is unplanned pregnancies. Women who have children that they didn't intend to have are at an increased rate of developing postnatal depression. So, in other words, the mother and child health services need to be strengthened across the board, including family planning.
Professor Rakubu?
Thank you, Danny. People go through trauma and neglected trauma and lack of assistance from justice system perpetuate these kinds of criminality, where now if we go into the psychological or the sociological factors surrounding this case, we might find that this mother has gone through trauma. This mother, the other circumstances surrounding how she got to have 4 children, where the father, the economic status, and all that. So all those factors come into play. Now, I will tap into the victimization, prior history of victimization, and so forth, whether she received necessary assistance, whether she, what is the nature of crime that she has experienced. Not that I'm saying all those that have been victims of crime and not receive assistance can kill their children, but it depends on multiple factors, which again, I say, let's check into a prior victimization and the social aspect of her community. Thank you.
Dr. Angus, anything else top of mind that we might have missed in this discussion as we conclude?
No, I don't think so. I think they've covered everything very well, ladies.
Thank you very much. That's Dr. Cathy Angus, clinical psychologist, and also Professor Kholofela Rakubu, who's a criminologist. And we also have in the studio here, I had Professor Kebogile Mokwena from Sifako Makhato Health Science University, all telling us, sharing with us their insights, discussing this whole issue of postpartum depression. We're discussing this, of course, on the back of the tragedy, the tragic news that came out of eNCA in the Eastern Cape just this week, where a mother has been arrested, is now going to be standing trial, and that trial begins on Monday, and she killed her 4 children, ages 2, 5, 9, and 11. We just wanted to understand what are the difficulties in our country in terms of our health services in providing much needed support to mothers. And I learned something I did not know here today, that postnatal depression is prevalent in our country, but we do not test for it currently. And Professor Mokwena, in her research, she's coming up with data that proves that it will be important to do so, and maybe there will be some policy changes in the health sector, because our mothers do need our love, care, and compassion.